Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and GameFound over the next week. And if you're new to the channel, we do this every week going over all the upcoming campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is definitely the place to be. But before I get started, I do like to go over some new announcements and discoveries that I just found out about over the past week, and I do have a couple really exciting updates here. The first one is that we have an official announcement and date for the board game Apex Legends, which is based on the video game with the same name, and this is one of the biggest battle royale video games ever made. It's free to play, and I do own a PS5, and this is pretty much the only game that I actually play. And I'm sure a ton of you are familiar with it and probably better at the game than I am, but if you haven't heard of the game before, Jesse over at Quackalope did put out a couple of videos going over the board game and what to expect, and he explains a little bit about the video game as well, and he did show some interest in trying to get into the game a little bit and experience it, so he has a little bit more context once he actually gets the board game, and I'd be happy to squad up with him, so if that's a collaboration you'd love to see us do, just head over to his videos, check him out, and spam his comment section down below until we twist his arm enough that he agrees. And it will probably look a lot like this.
Yeah, my childhood was going great, but life is full of surprises. Oh,
But for those of us that aren't so interested in video game IP, there is also a new announcement for a legendary board game that's getting a deluxe edition, and this is Cyclades, the Legendary Edition. And this is one of the games of a trio of very highly regarded area control games originally published by Matago. So if you are a fan of those other two games, you'll definitely want to check this one out. And of course, I'll be going into this in a lot more detail in the week of its launch, so feel free to subscribe down below if you don't want to miss out on that coverage. And one very last thing before I get started is that I always like to give a quick shout out to Alex over at Board Game Co, because him and I do work together putting together these lists of games. We do track all these games independently, but we sync up periodically and just make sure that all of our info is as up to date as possible. He also puts out a video at the end of each month going over the following month and letting you know of all the big games that we know about so far. And we are getting near the end of February here, so he should have his video up for March very soon. So if you want to check that out, you can find a link to his channel in the description below. And I guess this is also a good time to mention that I do have one more announcement to make, and that's that Alex is actually going to be hosting a board game convention. And this is going to be known as the Level Up Convention. It sounds like a lot of fun. It sounds like Alex is putting a lot of hard work into it, and it's going to be hosted in Connecticut. And this is a location that's not super difficult for me to make it out to, so I might show up as well, but I'll still be figuring that out as more information is provided. But that is everything I have for an intro, so let's check out the campaigns. And the first campaign we have launches on February 27th, but this one's actually going to be for two different games, with the first one being ALPAJURRAS and the other being Fisheries of Gloucester. And even though this is coming from Dr. Finn's Games that normally offers some lighter weight games, ALPAJURRAS is going to be a little bit more on the heavier side, and I think it's going to be the heaviest game that they have offered. And this is a game that plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 45 to 60 minutes to play, and in this game players are tree farmers trying to earn the most coins by harvesting and selling fruit. Players are going to be taking their turns performing their actions on their turns, and the way that the actions work in this game is really interesting because each player is going to have a mule token on the tiles that will be around the perimeter of the board, and these tiles can be mixed up and randomly placed each game to give you some different options from game to game. But the way that this works is that on your turn you'll be able to move your mule forward, and whichever space you stop on you'll be able to perform the actions there, and there can be one or more actions on a given space. But the catch here is that the player whose mule is the furthest behind is always the active player. So if you move really far up on the action track, then it's going to be a little while before you get a turn again because the other players might be moving up more slowly. And this is a mechanism that I really love because the players will have to balance how badly that they want a particular action versus the penalty they'll get by moving too far forward. And the board is going to be broken into a whole bunch of different regions, and each of these regions is going to be divided by an irrigation channel that players will be building throughout the game. And each of the locations will have different combinations of fruit growing there that will change throughout the game. And then they'll also each have their own city with different demand for different types of fruit. And players will be gaining money in a bunch of different ways, but fulfilling these orders in the cities as well as global orders are going to be the main ways that you're able to do that. But players can also complete different goal cards by achieving some sort of objective. And these goal cards use a ranking system where you can come in first, second, or third, and you'll be compensated accordingly. But in order to perform these different actions, you do have to land on the action space associated with it, and then you also have to meet those requirements. But there are other actions players can take as well, such as just gaining a fruit of your choice, placing one of your farmer tokens into any of the regions out on the board and then gaining a fruit from that region, moving a farmer from one region to another, or expanding an irrigation channel. And whenever you do that, you're going to be placing a irrigation token onto the board into these empty irrigation spaces, and you're going to be expanding that channel down the board, and then also adding a new type of fruit into the space connected to that irrigation channel, which will now produce that type of fruit within that region. And when you do this, you also get to gain a fruit from that region right away, but there is also one more action, and that is known as the harvest action. And whenever you trigger this action, then you're going to be gaining fruit for having the most farmers in each of the different areas. And the game continues like this, and then the player with the most money at the end of the game wins the game. And Fisheries plays 2 players. It takes about 30 to 45 minutes to play, and this is a game all about trying to catch and preserve the most fish. Each player is going to be starting out with 3 ships as well as their own player board, and their player board is just going to be used to track the number of actions that they have left, because players are going to be taking turns performing their actions, but there are also ways to gain more action points within your turn, so you'll want to be tracking that on your own player board. But that's not all, because players will also each get a lobster token. You can discard this at any point of the game to just earn yourself an extra turn. The main board has a whole bunch of different colored fish randomly placed in designated locations, and the game plays over 6 rounds with a chart card being flipped at the start of each round. And the main thing that the chart card does is it shows which shapes tiles the players will gain at the start of that round, and you'll be using those to chart out the courses of your different ships in order to get adjacent to these fish in order to catch them. Players will be alternating turns back and forth, taking their actions, and you'll be trying to put out these ocean tiles out on the board, and then using actions to move your ship along those ocean tiles. Placing an ocean tile is absolutely free, so you can take as many of those as you want or are able to within a round, but then moving a ship along an ocean tile is going to cost you some points, more points if you're moving over some rough waters. You're also going to have to spend an action point for collecting a fish adjacent to your boat, and players will be trying to get different combinations of these fish in order to fulfill the different preservation cards. And fulfilling one of these cards is also a free action, but you can only do it once per round, but that will guarantee you some victory points at the end of the game and can also get you some other benefits. And you might have also noticed all these different islands at the end of the board, and you can move your ship onto those islands, and you're probably going to want to do that once that area is all fished out, because you will gain points for just sitting on an island. And once all ships are on the islands, that's going to trigger the end of the game, then the player with the most points wins the game. And if this one sounds interesting to you, I do have links in the description below, and you can also follow along to get a free gift added to your pledge. And launching on February 28th, we have BRACKETMANIA, and this is a small party game where players will be drawing a topic from a topic deck, and then players are going to be writing different ideas on different dry erase cards, trying to have their idea be the best in a topic. So you might have different topics like what is the best game time snack, or who is the best board game content creator, and then players will be laying all those cards out in a bracket tournament structure where you're going to be going through each round, and players are going to be debating back and forth which one of the 2 cards is better within that bracket. The player's card that makes it all the way to the finals and then also wins that finals earns that player a victory point, and then the game continues like this over a number of rounds, and the player with the most points at the end of those rounds wins the game. And also launching on the 28th, we have HUANG, and this plays 2 to 4 players. It takes about 90 minutes to play, and this one looks like a really solid tile placement abstract war game. In this game, each player is going to have their own player screen, as well as 5 different leaders, and then 6 randomly drawn tiles that they're going to keep hidden behind their player screen. Both the tiles and leaders come in 5 different colors, and you're going to be earning victory points in each of those different colors, but then at the end of the game, only the color that you have the least of is going to tally up to equal your victory points. This is a really neat mechanism because it means that you're going to have to balance your effort for each of the different colors. The main board's made up of a hex grid with a few different types of terrain. Then there's also going to be some neutral tiles put out at the start of the game that are going to be the start of the different regions. On a player's turn, there's 5 different actions that they can perform, but they can only perform 2 of them. But you could also perform the same action twice. And some of these actions could be to place a leader or reposition or even remove a leader from the board, or place a tile on one of the regions. And each of the tiles can also work a little bit different and have a little bit different placement rules. For example, blue tiles can only go on the river, but you can also place as many blue tiles as you want in a single action. But each player only has 1 leader of each color, so if there's ever any 2 leaders of the same color within a single region, then that's going to cause a revolt in that region because you can only have 1 leader of each color in a region. And the way that this is resolved is through a show of strength. So all of the black tiles that are associated with your leader will add onto your leader's strength, but then players can also include any of the black tiles they have behind their player screen, adding that to their side strength. But the regions are also constantly expanding, and if a tile is ever placed that connects 2 regions together, then that's going to cause a war between the players that have the same colored leaders there. And this works exactly the same as the revolt, but instead of the black tiles, you're going to be using the red tiles, but then any player at the table can contribute red tiles to whichever side that they want to influence and help win. Players will be gaining victory points throughout the entirety of the game by placing tiles in regions with their leader of the same color, and then also by having a leader in a region with a matching pagoda. And as long as you have your colored leader in the same location as that same colored pagoda, you're going to be gaining points for that every single round. The game continues like this, and then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And if you are interested in this one, you'll definitely want to check it out in the description below, because if you subscribe to get notified, you'll also get an additional mini added to your pledge completely for free. And now launching on February 28th, we have Back-O Beyond, and this plays 2 to 4 players. It takes about 60 to 120 minutes to play, and this is a pirate-themed game that I thought was launching a couple of weeks back, so I did already record footage for this one, so I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. So this is a game for 2 to 4 players. It takes about 60 to 120 minutes to play, and this is a mid-weight Euro where players are competing to become the most renowned pirate. This is a game that plays over 5 rounds, with each round made up of 4 phases. There's the start of round phase where contracts are going to be revealed, ships are going to be added to the board that can be captured by any of the players, and then the tavern's going to be filled with more crew members that you could potentially recruit to your ship. Then there's the preparation phase where players are going to be performing actions by spending time on the island, and you're going to be spending your time resource in order to recruit new members to your ship, repair or upgrade your ship, or to do other things like sabotage the other players. And then there's the travel phase where you can attempt to plunder different trading ships, and in the process also raise your dread, morale, reputation, and most importantly your prestige. And a cool thing about the combat in this game is that it's a 3-phase dice-based combat system that does have a push your luck aspect where you can take on higher risks for more rewards, or lower risks for more mediocre rewards. But then at the end of each round there's the upkeep phase where you're going to be taking actions to keep or dismiss your crew through food, morale, and rum. And the player with the most prestige at the end of the game wins the game. Also launching on the 28th, we have Spirits of Christmas. This plays 1 to 6 players and takes about 30 to 45 minutes to play. And this is a cooperative game where players are trying to take Scrooge through scenes in the past, present, and future, and trying to change his ways. Each player is going to be starting the game with a number of spirit cards, each with a movement value on them, as well as a virtue. And there's 3 different types of virtue in the game. There's compassion, contentment, and charity. And players will be using those to try and fulfill different scene cards throughout the game. And the game plays over 3 rounds for past, present, and future, and each round's going to be set up with Scrooge starting in his bedroom, and then you're going to have a river of cards below that representing the scene for that moment in time. And players can take the move action and then spend a card for its movement points in order to move Scrooge that number of points down the river, and then you'll be able to interact with whichever card Scrooge is currently on. Some cards are resolved immediately just for landing on that card, which can give you different benefits like coins or additional cards, while other cards can have different icons on them representing the requirement needed to fulfill that card. And if you have those cards and then you also play the play cards action, then you'll be able to spend those cards in order to flip that card over. And the third type of card is the torch card, and if you move Scrooge here, you'll be able to gain the torch token, and that will just go onto the rondel, and any player can play that on their turn in order to take an action for free. Players can also use an action to draw 3 cards into their hand, or to give cards to another player that they think they might need to fulfill one of the cards on the river, because you are able to fulfill those cards by using the play cards action with just 1 card at a time, but it's much more efficient if you can get 1 player with all those cards and then perform that action just once. But in order to move around the rondel and take the different actions, you're also going to have to spend coins to do so, and if you ever run out of coins before you fulfill all the different requirements of the cards, then you have lost the game. And of course, to win the game is to complete all those scene cards from past, present, and future, and if this one sounds interesting to you, I have links in the description below. Also launching on the 28th, we have the Soda Pop collection, and this is a collection of abstract games for 2 players that each fit within their own soda can. And the first game in the collection is called Catacomb, and the way that this one's set up is that you're going to be randomly placing tiles of 3 different colors, and then one player is going to get all the cubes with the black cats on it, and then the other player is going to get the cubes with all the white cats on them. And the game also starts out with some neutral calico blocks already out on the board, and on your turn you can choose to do one of 2 things. You can either place a block of your color on a stack of cats already out on the board, or you can move a stack of cats using the Mancala mechanism, which means that when you're moving the stack, you're always going to be leaving one block behind. Whoever colored cat is at the top of a stack is the one that's in control of that region, and if a player controls 3 different regions, then they win the game, or if they are the top cat on top of 3 different stacks of 3, then they can also win the game that way. There can never be a stack more than 3, and there can never be 2 of the same colored blocks on top of each other. And the next game in the collection is called Lightseeker, and the way that this game works is that you're going to have a whole bunch of different blocks, each with a dark side and a light side, and then a few sides that are half dark and half light. If a side is fully light, it's worth 2 points, but if it's only half light, then it's just worth 1. And you're trying to be the first player to connect blocks in such a way that you have 7 points total that are all connected together. But the way that the game actually plays is that you're going to be alternating turns, and you can either choose to tumble one block over so that it moves over to another side, but then also moves over to an adjacent space, or instead you can choose to slide a block over so that you're maintaining the same side up, but you're just moving over one adjacent space. Of course, in order to do either of those, there has to be an open space adjacent to that block, so you're going to be competing in this puzzle against your opponent, trying to get the right number of blocks together when it is your turn. And all these games look like really solid games, but this next one looks like the one that I think would be my favorite of the 4, and this one's called Forgenesis. And in this game, you're going to be playing on a board where each player's base is on opposite corners, and there's going to be 2 summoning locations on each side of your base. And there's a whole bunch of different creatures with different abilities offered in this game, but you're only going to be playing with 4 in each game, which is going to make each game feel different from the last. But basically, players are going to be alternating turns, taking a main action and an optional action. Your optional action is always to summon a creature onto the board, but your main action is to either activate 1 or more creatures, and when you do that, you'll be able to move them around on the board and then also perform their special ability. But the thing is, when you do perform their special ability, they're going to be flipping to their inactive side. An inactive creature cannot use its special ability, so you also have an action that will refresh all inactive creatures to make them become active again. Of course, you'll want to be efficient with this because you don't want to spend too many turns activating your inactive creatures, which means that you'll want to get as many out on the board so you have more actions and abilities that you can use before you perform that rest action. And the last game in the collection is Top Cap, and this is a simple game where players will be moving caps on a board, trying to be the first to get one of their caps into their opponent's corner. And the way this game works is that each player has a corner of the board on their side, and then you're going to have a row of caps that are your tokens. Each turn you're going to be able to move one of your tokens, but you can only move your tokens into empty spaces, and the number of movement points you get for that token is dependent on the number of caps that are adjacent to it before you made the movement. This is going to create an interesting strategy where you're trying to get tokens adjacent to your tokens, but not adjacent to your opponents, so that you have the most movement points on your turn. And if you think you might be backing this game, you will want to subscribe because it'll also get an additional game added to your pledge completely for free, which is called Get Salty. This is a game you're going to have to try not to eat while you're alternating turns, placing or moving snacks with the objective of trying to get 3 snacks of the same kind within a row. And you can find links to this campaign in the description below. Also launching on the 28th, we have Sally Face Strange Nightmares. And this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 45 minutes to play. And this is a cooperative game based on the video game with the same name. And this is coming from the same publisher that published the previous game, The Binding of Isaac. And this is a game that ended up breaking all sorts of records on Kickstarter. But in Sally Face Strange Nightmares, players are going to be selecting a scenario and then setting up the game according to that scenario. And you're going to be progressing the story, solving different mysteries in order to stop cultists and demons from spreading corruption throughout the world. Players are going to be rolling dice on their turn and then using those results in order to perform different actions in order to solve different mysteries. And you'll want to solve these mysteries because any unsolved mysteries will spread corruption and could potentially kill your players or even cause them to go mad. But all's not lost if this happens, because you can still perform actions as a ghost or completely mad, but in doing so it is going to help advance your enemy's progression to world domination. Players will also each have their own unique special abilities, and you'll be able to collect different artifacts throughout the game in order to modify the outcomes of your rolls or perform other special effects to tip the odds in your favor. And if this one does sound interesting to you, there'll be a lot more info on the campaign, which you can find linked in the description below. Also launching on the 28th, we have Nevermind The Distraction. This is a solo game that takes just 5 to 20 minutes to play, and this is a game all about meditation, mindfulness, and clearing your mind. And the way this game works is that you're going to be shuffling up 3 different distraction packs, and these all just have different themes, which will make each game feel a little bit different than the last. But you'll be shuffling those together and creating a 3x3 grid with a breathe card in the middle. Beside your grid of cards, you're also going to have this deck of mind cards, and at the start of each turn, you're going to be drawing one of these cards, and it's going to basically tell you which of the cards in your grid of cards is going to be affected. If that card hasn't been flipped yet, then it's going to be flipped over to the other side. But if it's a card that's already been flipped, then you're going to be moving a thought token onto it, indicating that it has now become a distraction. But the nice thing here is that you do have a few actions to deal with this. You can either perform the action to notice that you've been distracted, which will allow you to put the thought token back onto the token adjacent to that card, or you can perform the acknowledge action, which will allow you to flip a card without a token on it back to being face down. You can focus on your breath, which will move one of your unused thought tokens to the breath card in the center of the grid. And the final action is to let go of one of your thoughts by moving one of your thought tokens from the breath card onto one of your face down cards in the grid. And once you're able to do that, that card will no longer be affected by anything that shows up in the mind deck. The game ends once you've run out of cards to draw, and then you're going to be earning a point for each of the thoughts that you were able to let go of, but then you're going to be losing a point for any of the cards that are still face up. This rule set is the most basic version of the game, and as you win and become more proficient in the game, you can also include more rules to add more complexity and make it a little bit more difficult. Also launching on the 28th, we have Wanderlust, and this plays 2 to 5 players and takes about 40 to 100 minutes to play, and this is a competitive game where players are going to be exploring the world and trying to gain as many victory points as possible while they do so. The game starts with the trip planning phase, where 3 random locations are going to be drawn, and these are going to be the 3 locations that players can visit throughout the game. These are the only locations that players can stop at. Although there's a whole bunch of different locations on the board, you're only going to be able to stop at these 3 specific locations. Players can be alternating turns, taking exactly 2 actions on their turn, and your first action is to take transport tickets, and you can either take them from the display or from the face down deck. And these cards are going to have different types of travel, and they're going to be moving you through the different routes between the locations, and in order to reach a location, you're going to have to meet all the requirements of the routes that you're taking by having the appropriate cards in order to move along those routes. And in order to do this, you're going to be using your second action, which is to spend the tickets to move between your current location and your destination. And then the final action you can take is to perform a location action. And you're going to be gaining souvenirs or postcards or photos, which can help you complete different objectives and earn victory points for the end of the game. And each player starts the game at the home location depending on the character that they're playing as. The end of the game is triggered once a player has visited 2 of the 3 locations, and players will be gaining victory points for completing different objectives, completing their secret goals, as well as gaining victory points for each location that they passed through whenever they went to go visit a city. This means that the fastest route is not always best. Instead, you're going to be wanting to pass through as many locations as possible on your way to your destination city, because you're going to be gaining victory points for each of those. Just remember, you can't actually stop on those locations, you can only pass through them. So this means that you're going to be collecting cards until you're able to do that, and then you're going to be using them all at once. Once the end of the game is reached, players are going to be adding up all their victory points from all these different sources, and the player with the most victory points wins the game. Also launching on the 28th, we have Encounters Shattered Waste, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 60 to 100 minutes to play. And this is a cooperative boss battler that I thought was launching last week, but instead it got pushed back to this week. But it looks like a really fun game, and I'll just go ahead and roll my previous footage for you now. Players are going to be choosing their characters at the start of the game, then also choosing a boss to go up against, and of course trying to defeat that boss before the boss defeats them. But something that I really love about this game is the way that the characters work, because each character is going to have the normal hero state, then they also have their shattered state. And when you go into your shattered state, you're going to be a little bit more vulnerable, but you're also going to be a lot more powerful. So even though you might be more of a glass cannon in the state, you will want to trigger it at some point in the game if your health gets too low, since it's going to reset your stats and charge your health back up to full. And the way that players play this game is by using this combat board, and you're going to be putting your selected boss out in the middle of the board, along with their boss card, which is going to dictate their different abilities, as well as the number of dice that they get to roll in their turn. And the board has a number of lanes where the boss will be issuing its attacks to, and each of these lanes are associated with a different value of a die. So when you do go ahead and roll the die on the boss's turn, that's essentially going to say which lane its attack is going to get issued to, and you're going to be drawing that from its stamina deck. Each player gets 2 actions per turn, and their characters are going to stay within these blue squares for the entirety of the game. At the start of the game, you can put your character in any spot that you want, but depending on the character that you're playing as and the different abilities that they have access to, it might dictate whether or not you want to be in the front column or the back column, because that's going to have different effects in combination with your character and their abilities, but that might also change as you develop more abilities or different situations come up within the game. Players are going to be rolling dice as dictated by their character card, as well as use the different abilities they have access to in order to attack the cards in their lane, and whenever you defeat a card, it's going to go back to the fatigue deck on the monster side of the board. But of course, making these attacks and using these different abilities can use up a certain number of magic points, which you might want to refresh at some point in the game. And also, whenever you defeat an enemy, it's going to add a certain amount of threat to your character, and that's something you'll want to keep an eye on, because anytime that your threat reaches its maximum amount, that's going to put you into your shattered state permanently. And like I said before, you might want to time that depending on the situation in the game. Of course, there's also your health to worry about because you don't want to die, so there is also a refresh action you can take in order to manage your magic points, your health status effects, or to try and reduce your threat. And on the enemy's turn, you're going to be flipping up 1 card in each lane where there is a character, and then that's going to let you know what sort of effect that card's going to have. It can issue damage, it can also cause additional threat, and even have some other effects. Some of these cards are much worse than the others, so that means that players are going to want to try and permanently get rid of those ones first. But that's easier said than done, because as I said, when you defeat a card, it just puts that card into the enemy's fatigue area, and that does not permanently get rid of the card. Instead, that just becomes its new draw deck as soon as its stamina deck runs out. But this is a really important point in the game, because when that stamina deck does run out, it's going to put the enemy into a staggered state. And what this means is that when the enemy is in that state, any of the cards that you're able to defeat, instead of going into the fatigue pile, will go into a permanent discard. And you can think of this as actually dealing damage to the enemy, because if you're able to get all the cards over to that permanent discard pile, then you have won the game. Or I guess I should say you have almost won the game, because as soon as you get to that point, the enemy's going to flip over to their enraged side, and there might be some final things that you have to deal with before you can walk away scot-free. A really interesting game here, and I think it's another one that has a really solid design, so if this one looks interesting to you, you can go ahead and sign up to get notified on their website, or if the campaign has launched, you can check it out for yourself, and you can find links to their website in the description below. Also launching on the 28th, we have an Age Contrived, and this plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 60 to 120 minutes to play, and this one is a competitive engine builder Euro, and it looks like a ton of fun, so it's no surprise that this one is our Discord pick of the week. And the way this game works is that players are basically trying to complete these different monuments, and in order to complete a monument, you're actually going to be trying to get your tokens onto the matching spaces of these different monument boards, and then once the final token is added on the final space, then that tile actually becomes a section of the monument, and the player who placed that final token onto that tile will be adding that to the monument and then gaining a victory point, but anyone else who also contributed will also be compensated. The tokens that players are using to complete these monuments are also used for all sorts of actions in the game, and when you do complete a section of a monument, you're actually going to be sacrificing one of those tokens, so it does gain you a victory point, but it does come at a cost. And it's performing all the different actions where I think this game gets really interesting, because each player is going to have their own player board that's divided into a bunch of different columns, with each column being associated with an action outlined at the bottom of that column. And on your turn, you can either do one of 2 things. You can either add a new tile onto your player board, which will make it act like a sort of conveyor belt, because when you do that, you're going to be adding that new tile to the left, adding whatever tokens you want into the empty spaces of that tile, and then you're going to be pushing all the other tiles over to the right. And then then whichever tile is on the furthest right is going to get knocked off your board and put back into your supply, and you'll always have at least 2 tiles in your supply. But each of these tiles is divided into two with a top portion and a bottom portion, and any of the tokens that you have on a bottom portion of a tile represents an action that you can take. And this is the other option you have on your turn. You can spend as many of these tokens in the bottom portion of these tiles in order to perform the different actions in those columns. And these actions can allow you to do different things, like deploy the tokens on the top portion of the tiles out onto the main board in order to do different things like fulfill the requirements of those different monuments, or they could even allow you to gain new tokens into your supply, which you may want to do if you've spent a lot of them building monuments, or you might want to perform the other action that allows you to move your main character around out on the main board, because I did mention this was a engine builder, and the way that you do that is by moving your character around on the board, because anywhere that you stop on the main board is going to give you some sort of upgrade that's going to improve your engine. And the different upgrades you can get can be different things like new action tiles, which will improve the action of each of the different columns, or you could get new tiles with even more spaces so that you can get even more tokens into a single tile, or you can gain an additional bonus action which you can slot into a column in the top of the column, or you can even upgrade the abilities of your specific character, which are different for each and every character in the game. And one of the other actions you can do is to actually build new action spaces out on the main board that all players can use, but when you do build that new action space, you're taking it off a section of your character's board, which when you move that token from your board onto the main board, it's going to be revealing a special ability that you will now have for your character. I think this looks like a really solid game without too many moving parts and too much complexity, while still offering a ton of fun and good decisions. And if this sounds like a type of game that you might be interested in, I have links to the campaign in the description below. Also launching on the 28th, we have the Demise of Dr. Frankenstein. This plays 2 to 4 players and takes just 60 minutes to play, and this is a competitive game where players are mad scientists trying to create as many monsters as they can before the villagers try and stop you. And the way that this game works is that this is a Euro game where players are going to be rolling dice at the start of the game, and you're going to be assigning those dice to the different action locations, and that's going to dictate which actions are available. On a player's turn, they're going to be drafting one of these die in order to perform the associated action. And the different actions that players can perform are to move Igor around on the lab in order to make those different parts of the lab available, or they can gain body parts from the Undertaker, which they'll be using to build the monsters with. You can just gain coins in order to help you in different areas of the game, place cubes on the lab in order to gain points, but then also gain the benefits of that part of the lab. There's also an action where you can spend your coins in order to buy cards to do things like set collection, or gain extra scoring potential at the end of the game, or also gain new abilities to help you throughout the game. And the final action you can take is the Curator action, which actually allows you to perform any of the other actions, but allows you to do it much better and more efficiently. But it does cost you a cube in order to do that, and you're going to be indicating that by putting the cube on that action. And if you have a cube there, you can't do that action again through the Curator action. And building your different monsters not only requires the appropriate body parts, but also requires you to have cubes in the right portions of the lab, which means that your cubes are a valuable resource, so you don't want to spend too many of them on the Curator action. Some actions will also progress the villager track, and once that reaches the 4th position, that's going to cause the villagers to storm everyone's labs, which is going to reset all the cubes out on the board, but it will also trigger scoring for any of the monsters that you were able to build within that round. Once this happens as many times as there are players in the game, that's going to trigger the end of the game, and the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. I said game way too many times there. Also launching on the 28th, we have Souls of Ankiril, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 25 to 60 minutes to play, and this is a competitive strategy game where each player is going to be playing as a different faction with a different leader and different creatures that you're going to be using to your advantage. The main board is created by combining 2 boards together, with each side being associated with whichever faction you're choosing to play, and there are going to be a whole bunch of different factions to choose from, each with their own board, which will create a lot of different permutations of the boards that you'll be playing on, as well as the different decks and leaders that you'll be getting for each of these factions, each with their own unique weaknesses and strengths. But each of these different boards will have 3 different portals where the player of that side will be summoning their creatures, and in order to win the game, you need to defeat the portals of your opponents. Players will always be drawing back up to a hand of 5 cards at the start of their turn, but they'll also be gaining some energy as well, which they'll be spending in order to activate the different cards in their hand. Players are going to have 2 different cards to work with. There's the creature cards, which you'll be using to summon creatures out onto the board, and then there are the spell cards, which will have different different effects and different boosts that you can use in conjunction with other actions or creatures. Each creature can also have different passive abilities or abilities that you'll need to activate, and when a creature is out on the board, using those abilities is completely free and does not cost an action. But of course, using that creature will exhaust it and you won't be able to use their ability again until the following turn. Each player will also have a creature that acts as the leader, and the leaders work very similar to the other creatures. You'll be summoning them out onto the board, but the difference here is that when they are defeated and removed from the board, they go into a cooldown area until you can deploy them again. But when they are out on the board, they also act as a summoning portal where you can summon other creatures adjacent to your leader. The game continues like this, with players spending energy to activate their cards in order to manipulate the board until one player has defeated all 3 portals of their opposing player, and then that player wins the game. And if this one sounds interesting to you, you can find links to the campaign in the description below. And the next campaign that we have, also launching on the 28th, is Ancient Terrible Things Reawakened. And this plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 40 to 120 minutes to play. And this is a game that I think looks like a ton of fun, and I'm excited for it to launch. But it is a game that I thought was launching a couple weeks back, so I did already offer footage for this one. So I'll just go ahead and roll that footage for you now. And in this game, players are explorers traveling down a river in a riverboat through a dangerous forest filled with all sorts of different creatures. And a really nice addition to this version of the game that really adds to the ambiance is that there's actually a riverboat dice tower that you're going to be using to roll your dice. And the way this game works is that there's all sorts of different locations located all around the riverboat, and each of these are going to be associated with a different action, but they also are going to have a random enemy assigned to that location that if you happen to put your worker there, you're also going to have to fight that enemy. And in order to do all this, players are going to be taking turns placing their worker at one of these locations. And whenever you do that, you're going to be gaining any resources that have built up there over time. But then, as I said, each location is going to have a special action that the player gets to do. But then there is also going to be a communal action that all players get to do. I really like this idea because not only are you trying to go to a location with the action that you want to perform, but you're also trying to time that at the moment where that communal action benefits you the most and doesn't benefit your opponents. These actions can do all sorts of different things, like gain you resources or coins, or allow you to buy or sell items from the market. And those cards that you gain are really important because you're going to be building up your engine of abilities as the game goes on, which is going to give you more confidence when trying to fight those more challenging encounters. And that is exactly what happens after you've performed your actions, because now you're going to have to deal with the encounter at that location, and each encounter is going to have a number of points associated with it, as well as a certain pattern of die that you're going to have to roll equal or better to in order to successfully defeat that enemy. Since the requirement of this one is 5 different 4s, that means that you're going to have to roll 5 dice that are equal or greater than a 4. Not an easy task, but if you have the right abilities and items, this might be something that you are capable of. And the encounters and the way that the dice rolling along with the abilities work in this game is another thing that I think looks like a lot of fun. So I guess it's probably at this point that I should mention that this one is my own personal pick of the week. And when you do get involved into an encounter, you'll be able to use your abilities in order to manipulate the dice that you're able to roll. You're usually going to be rolling 7 dice, 5 of which are going to be colored, indicating that they are used to try and fulfill the requirements of that encounter. But then there is always 2 action dice, and I will come back to those in a second here. But depending on the abilities and resources that you have available to you, you might be able to swap out some of those basic green dice with dice of different colors, because not only do the abilities that you have affect the way that your encounter can unfold, but there's also different dice that you can gain, and some of these are more beneficial than others depending on what you're trying to achieve. And once that's all said and done and you've rolled those dice, you'll have one final chance to modify the outcome. But the thing that's really cool here is that you don't just have free access to all your actions willy-nilly. Instead, you're going to have to spend those action dice that you rolled in order to activate the actions on your cards. But as you might have noticed, some of those action dice do have icons on them, which can grant you special benefits if you don't use them on your turn. So this does create a really great decision point where you have to choose whether to keep that die or spend it to perform one of your actions. Defeating that encounter will gain you that card along with the victory points, but each of those cards also comes with an icon beside the name of the card, and there is also a set collection aspect here where if you can create different combinations of icons, you'll gain additional victory points at the end of the game. But if you are unable to defeat that encounter, you're going to be gaining insanity tokens, and these count as negative victory points at the end of the game. But there is one nice thing about acquiring them, and that's that they can be spent in order to perform some special bonus abilities. And when you do that, you're going to be flipping it, indicating that you've spent that token, but you still do keep that token, and it still does count as negative points at the end of the game. And the game continues like this, with players taking turns choosing a location, performing the actions there, and then fighting the encounter. Then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And as always, you can find a link to the campaign down below, and you can click on that Notify Me button in order to get notified when that campaign launches. And now launching on March 1st, we have Hellbringer, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 45 to 180 minutes to play. And this one is a cooperative dungeon crawler where players are going to be choosing their character at the start of the game. Each character is going to have different stats, skills, and gear that they're going to be starting with, but that could be upgraded throughout the game. Players are going to be choosing a scenario along with its final boss, and then you're going to be building up the dungeon by creating different decks of cards and then stacking them on top of each other to represent the different levels of the dungeon. Each one of these levels is going to have different gear and monsters in them, as well as a tome card which causes an effect and also provides narrative for that portion of the dungeon. And then once you get through all these levels, you'll be going up against the final boss because that card's going to be put on the very bottom. On a player's turn, they can pay their action points to activate or equip new cards from their hand onto their personal player board in order to perform different actions. Weapons will allow you to roll a certain number of dice in order to attack monsters, and defeating monsters is a good thing because you'll be able to keep those cards and then slide them into whichever area you want onto the side of your board in order to upgrade that specific stat. Players will then draw cards back up to their hand size, which can gain you new cards into your hand, but as you're drawing these cards, you might also draw different monster cards. And when this happens, the monsters are going to go onto the monster board, but each of the monsters will have a different level of perception that makes them more difficult to see. And depending on your character's perception, you may not be able to find those monsters. And of course, you won't be able to attack what you don't see, so they will be able to attack you, but you won't be able to attack back until you're able to raise your perception high enough. And during the monster's turn, you're going to be rolling a die to determine what the monsters do. They could attack the players or the players' companions, or they may cause the players to have to discard a number of cards from their hands. Get through all the levels of the dungeon and defeat that final boss, and you win that scenario. Also launching on March 1st, we have Scholars of the South Tigris, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play. And this is the next installment in the South Tigris series, which is part of the bigger series offered by Garphill Games. And this is also the one that I think I would like the most. I love dice worker placement, which is the main focus of the South Tigris series, but this one also looks like it's a little bit less complex than their previous release, which for my own taste felt like it was just asking a little bit too much for me, whereas I think this one is going to hit that sweet spot that I really like in my Euro games. And because of these reasons, this one is my own personal pick of the week. But in this game, players are going to be exploring the world, discovering different scrolls, hiring translators in order to translate those scrolls, and then gain the wisdom and knowledge in order to score victory points. Players will be starting the game with their own player board that they'll be able to upgrade throughout the game, as well as influence tokens that will be basically placed on any areas of the board where you're performing different actions, indicating that you did have an influence there, and at certain points in the game, those will earn you benefits. Players will also be using a draw bag where you're going to be drafting different colored dice in order to perform your actions, but players will also get a hand of action cards as well as a goal card that they can complete for different benefits, as well as a starting scroll and tokens to mark their location on the map board and the different research tracks. Each round, players are going to be drawing dice from the dice bag and then rolling them in order to determine what they have available to perform their actions. Players will be choosing an action card from their hand and then assigning it to one of the action spaces on their main board. And then you can assign up to 2 dice to the card that you just played, because each action could have different requirements like a minimum number of pips or a certain colored die that you need in order to perform it. Players will also be gaining these different colored worker meeples, and if you have those, you can also use those to modify the value of your dice or to make it act like it's a different color. And the action you're performing is represented by the icon underneath the action space where you put the card, not the action that's actually on the card. I'll come back to that later. But the different actions you have available to you on your board are to recruit a translator, and when you do that, you can do one of two things. You can either discard a translator from this top row in order to gain the benefits of that card, or instead you can pay silver to hire that translator, which would move that card to this bottom row, putting your influence on it, indicating that you are the one that hired it. But then that translator is going to be available for all players if they choose to use it to translate scrolls in the future. But in order for players to translate scrolls, they're going to have to find them first, and in order to do that, you can take an action to move your token around on the map track, and then you'll be able to pay to move a scroll adjacent to your current location on that track into one of the 3 columns in these Houses of Wisdom. And once you have scrolls into the Houses of Wisdom and translators that are able to translate that specific language, you can use an action to pay a hired translator to translate that scroll. When you do that, you'll gain the benefits of that scroll, and then you'll also be keeping that card for its victory points. But the cool thing about this is that a translator can only be used a certain number of times before that translator retires. And when a translator retires, that card is actually going to go back to the player who originally hired it, and you'll be able to slide it under one of the action spaces on your board, which is going to grant you bonus actions every time you go to use that action. And just like you can use an action to move your token around on the map board, you can also use an action to move your token up on a research track. And of course, this will just gain you benefits in that specific track depending on what you moved your token into. But the final action you can choose to do is to rest, and this is where your cards come into play, because whenever you rest, you're going to be getting the benefits of the different cards that you played into the action spaces, and then those are going to be going back into your hand. But as players complete the different scrolls, you're going to be drawing new scrolls from the scroll deck and then adding them onto the empty areas of the map. But there's 4 special cards that are strategically placed within that deck, and each time you draw one, instead of it getting added to the map, it's going to be moving up into this special area of the board instead. And when these cards come out, they're going to trigger all sorts of victory points and bonuses to the players that have the most influence in each of the Houses of Wisdom. But once that 4th card is drawn, that's going to trigger the end of the game, and then you're going to have a final round, tally up your victory points, and the player with the most victory points wins the game. And those are all the campaigns I have for you this week, but don't leave yet, because as always, we do have a few awesome giveaways to announce, and these are the easiest giveaways to enter ever. All you have to do is leave a comment down below, but it's getting pretty late here, so I'll be right back in a couple of hours. And the first giveaway we have is for a pledge for the Red Dragon Inn 9, the Undercity. And this is a standalone expansion to the game, the Red Dragon Inn, which, if you're not familiar with, is a competitive card game where players are going to be managing their fortitude and their alcohol and trying to be the last one still partying at the bar. All adventurers do need their downtime, and the Red Dragon Inn is one of the more popular pubs. And the way this game plays is that each player is going to be choosing their character and taking their associated character deck, but then they're also going to get a board to measure their fortitude and their alcohol. These are both going to be tracked on the same track, but they're going to be moving in opposite directions, with your fortitude starting at 20 and your alcohol content starting at 0. And if those 2 tokens ever meet, you're going to pass out and be kicked out of the pub. Your deck of cards will have all sorts of different cards, like the action cards that you'll be playing on your turn, and then the sometimes cards and anytime cards that will be played at different times of the game. There's also a special gambling card where you can trigger a gambling minigame to try and drain your opponents of all their gold. But on your turn, you're essentially starting with a hand of cards, and then you can discard and redraw as many of those as you like. You're going to be playing an action card from your hand and then performing that action, which is usually going to be some sort of benefit to you or something harmful to the other players. You'll then be ordering a drink for one of the other players, which means that you're going to be taking a drink from the face down pile in the center of the table and then keeping it face down but putting it on that player's board. Players each have a spot on their board for their different drinks, and the more drinks you get, the more of a queue of drinks you'll have on your board. And the final thing you do on your turn is to take a drink from your own board. Your cards can have all sorts of different effects, but those are one of the main ways that will affect your fortitude, and then the drink cards are the main way that will affect your alcohol. And if that main drink deck in the middle completely runs out, then all the players are going to have to pay a coin in order to get it replenished. And of course, if any player ends up with no coins at the end of their turn, then they're also going to be kicked out of the bar, because you got to be able to pay your tab. And as I said, this is a standalone expansion, so it's going to be introducing a whole bunch of new characters, and this can be played on its own, or it can be mixed in with any of the previous content. And this giveaway is going to be for the Collector's Edition pledge, which comes with the core game as well as all unlocked stretch goals, but it also comes with extra promo cards as well as upgraded components. And to enter this giveaway, just leave a comment down below with the hashtag Undercity, and you can say whatever you want, but if you're looking for some sort of suggestion, maybe you could let us know what your favorite drink is. For myself, I usually like to keep things pretty simple. I'm not a fan of too much sweetness in my drinks, so a gin and soda or a vodka and soda is usually what you'll see me drinking. And I also do love a good whiskey on the rocks, but if I get into that, my fortitude and my alcohol track seem to meet pretty quickly. Good luck in the giveaway. And the next giveaway we have is for a pledge for What on Earth Are You Talking About? And this looks like a really fun party game that's really easy to teach. And in this game, players are split into two groups. There's the human group and the alien group, but this will be alternating throughout the game, so you will get the opportunity to play as both the aliens and the humans. But what exactly is happening here is that the aliens have abducted some of the humans, but they also witnessed some different things while they were down on Earth, and the aliens are going to be communicating what they saw, and it's going to be up to the humans to try and translate what they're saying. And the way that this works is essentially just with two different types of cards. There's the Earth cards, which are going to have the thing that you're trying to describe. Then there's going to be the alien cards, which is going to be a series of letters. And some of these cards can also have underscores in them where you can sub in any letter that you want. But you're essentially trying to describe the thing while stringing together sentences with words that start with each of the letters on the alien card. So although this is a party game, it is also a bit of a word game because you're going to be trying to string together words while also trying to create a somewhat sensible sentence, and also trying to give the best clue possible because only the humans are competing, and the first human to correctly guess the word earns a point. And then once all players have had a chance to play as a human, the player with the most points at the end of the game wins the game. And this giveaway is going to be for the Captain's Pledge, which is an all-in pledge, which is going to get you the core game and all the expansions, including the Versus expansion, the Not Safe for Aliens expansion, and then also 2 tinfoil hats so that the aliens can't read your minds. It'll also get you all unlocked stretch goals and instant access to the web app version of the game. And to enter this giveaway, just leave a comment down below with the hashtag Earth, and you can say whatever you want, but if you're looking for a suggestion, maybe you could try it and say whatever your YouTube handle is, but in alien speak. And the last giveaway we have is for a pledge for rapid stat generation dice, and these are dice that are specially designed in order to rapidly generate stats for your D&D characters. So if you often find yourself as a game master, this can be something to really help speed up the generation of stats if you're creating multiple characters in a single go. And the dice are made up of a whole bunch of d20s, but the numbers on them are specifically designed to give you the outcome that's very similar to the 4D drop the lowest method. So when you're generating a single character, you can just roll all these dice at once and it'll give you all the information you need to put together the stats for that character. And if you're quick enough, we still have 2 giveaways over there that haven't been drawn yet, which you can go ahead and click on as well. And it will notify you if you are drawn as long as you have the app installed. Otherwise, I will also try to reach out to you as well. And we did have a giveaway last week, but I didn't realize it didn't fund yet. I usually always try to wait till the campaigns fund before I announce them as a giveaway because this kind of thing can happen where they get canceled. And this did happen with Crystal Age, so I'm sure this will be coming back sometime in the future, but unfortunately I won't be able to draw for that giveaway. I apologize for that, but we'll have a lot more to come. That's everything I have for you this week, and this filming did branch into the following morning because this was such a long video with so many games. I hope there's something there that you liked, but I really should get to the editing so that this goes up at a reasonable time. So until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.